So we'll just continue on with the brain. All right, so we have been staying up in the parts of the brain that came from the prosencephalon, the forebrain. We talked about the cerebral hemispheres. Then we were talking about some of these deeper brain structures like the thalamus, the epithalamus, the hypothalamus, which is connected to the pituitary gland there. Hypothalamus. Let me draw that a little better so it doesn't look affect. I've been trying to get my keyboard working again, so this should work. Now, what are functions of the hypothalamus? What kind of things is it doing?
Controls the pituitary gland.
So that's a big part. It's controlling the pituitary gland. So it's a major player in the connection between the nervous system and the endocrine system. The pituitary gland is the kind of this master gland that controls lots of other glands, plus has a lot of just major hard-hitting hormones of its own. So hypothalamus, this bridge between, a lot of times people don't even, they say like the neuroendocrine system, because it's, the nervous system and the endocrine system are very intimately entangled.
Professor, sorry, I think your arrow's in the wrong spot, but I could be wrong with the hypothalamus.
You are not wrong.
Okay.
Pointing to the thalamus there.
Yeah.
I was just putting it in there. Okay, hold on a
For a
second.
curveball, keeping us on our toes.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, so that big kind of more egg-shaped thing is the thalamus, which is more that sensory relay. The hypothalamus is down here. Epithalamus with the pineal gland is kind of a little above and to the back. And this is anterior. All right, so control of endocrine through the pituitary. What else does hypothalamus do?
Autonomic control.
A lot of autonomic control. It's going to do a lot of respiratory control. It's going to do a lot of cardiovascular control. It changes like your pupils. And then it does a lot of kind of, setting your temperature, your thermostat. And then things like, your basic osmolarity in your body. It's the place that has your thirst centers. Like if you're starting to get your osmolarity is going too high, it's going to make you thirsty, so you want to drink and dilute yourself a little bit. So it's got a lot of these basic drives as well, like thirst and hunger, as well as like sex drive. And again, it's got a lot of the emotions are tied in there as well. Just like, rage and pleasure and fear and all sorts of stuff. So it's got a lot going on. So hypothalamus. So the rest of the stuff we're going to go through quicker. So now we're going to start getting down into the brainstem. The brainstem, which is the midbrain, going down into the pons and the medulla oblongata. And all of that is going to be more involved with kind of basic functioning. And sometimes people like to say it's like the reptilian brain or something. It's the stuff that's kind of more doing the low-level functioning of keeping your body alive, basic reflexes, so you avoid things that you're about to walk into or something like that. So let's do that. I will use kind of the ghost to kind of show there's still all of this here. But now we're gonna look at the midbrain. We're gonna look at the pons and the medulla oblongata. So that's what we're going to look at now. Like I said, we're going to do this a little more superficially than we've been going into the other parts, just because we need to keep things rolling. Things that in the midbrain. Midbrain on the back, again, let's keep ourselves oriented here. On the back of the midbrain are these little bumps. There's actually 4 of them. Like I've drawn them from the side, it looks like 2, but if they're 2 side by side, so there's actually 4 little bumps. The superior and the inferior colliculi. What? Okay, I thought I was going to speed things up by using my little type tool, but it's auto-correcting incorrectly. Superior and inferior colliculi. So these are doing kind of more basic auditory and visual reflexes. So if we look at the superior colliculi, these are visual reflexes. Some of the things that are being calculated and coordinated by the superior colliculi are saccades. Let me mention what a saccade is. A saccade is your eyes moving from whatever they're looking at in one big ballistic motion going to look at something else. So for instance, if you're looking at a room here, like, you know, there's a dog, you know, and oh, there's a potted plant, you know, oh, and there's somebody. You know, when you walk and you look in this room, your gaze doesn't just smoothly flow over everything in the room. It ends up settling in on one thing. It's like, oh, there's a dog. And then your eyeballs accelerate. And then they land on something else. Oh, then I'm looking at that. And then they, boom, accelerate. Then they land over here. So that's a saccade. A saccade is when you are looking at something, you're kind of, it's in your center of view, and then your eyeballs accelerate and they land on another place in your field of view. So that's how you look around. When you look around, you don't actually just have your eyes drifting. Your eyes actually kind of spring from one place to another place. And that's a saccade. That's something that is being controlled in those superior colliculi. I mean, interesting, you know, this is just a little aside, but I think it's just fascinating. Like if you look at a face and you put an eye tracker on someone to see what their eyes are doing, your saccades are going to go to the places on the face that are going to give you information about, it's going to go to the eyes, to the mouth. So you kind of jump around to the relevant places on the face where you're going to get it. What is their expression? What is their nonverbal communication? When you have people with kind of the like autism, and you do the same thing, you put eye trackers on them, you find that their gaze just lands on random places. They don't have the same kind of intuition about where to look to detect, where should I be kind of focusing to, get the nonverbal communication that's coming off of this person in the moment. But even looking at someone's face, you don't just take in their whole face. You're kind of landing on different parts of their face. So those are saccades. So saccades, superior colliculi, these little bumps of neural tissue on the top of the back of the midbrain. There's also stuff in there, just like, if you're about to walk into something, and you don't even know what it is, like you've probably experienced this, like, whoa, like it's like there's something just deep in your brain that's keeping like making you avoid some kind of thing that you're about to like walk into. That would be like in the colliculi. The inferior colliculi are more about auditory reflexes. Like there's a noise and you orient, it's like, either, so both visual and auditory kind of low level reflexes. That's one of the things going on in the colliculi. Other things in the midbrain, the substantia nigra is in the midbrain. It means black substance, and it's because there's melanin there, melanin which is used as a precursor to make the dopamine that the neurons release. So this is a place in the brain that's important to know about because it is at the core of Parkinson's disease. So these are dopaminergic neurons. Let me get my type tool again. Back. So dopamine releasing neurons that connect into the basal nuclei. That's kind of in a, if I was going to be more official, I would say like dopaminergic neurons, that project into basal nuclei. That would be kind of the more official way to say it. Dopaminergic meaning kind of dealing with dopamine. Project meaning their axons go in and connect up into the basal nuclei. So substantia nigra. So obviously, if they are helping control the basal nuclei, what kind of things are they involved in?
And the voluntary modulation.
Small movements.
So movement. So they're going to be involved with the movement, the motor stuff. In Parkinson's disease, these neurons start degenerating. And when you start having those neurons start to degenerate and not releasing their dopamine up into the basal nuclei, again, the caudate nucleus, the lentiform nucleus, when that's not happening, then that's when you start getting these motor things like the tremors, and you have trouble starting and stopping motions. People talk like cogwheel motion, like I can't start, it starts, but now I can't stop it. Parkinson's disease also can have cognitive effects too, like kind of people get kind of foggy, or people often get kind of like a mask-like expression because their facial muscles aren't working well anymore. Um, like some of the therapeutics people have used to help with this, are like things that increase dopamine, which helps deal, at least temporarily, will deal with some of the symptoms. But as this keeps degenerating, you just start getting worse and worse symptoms. And this is also one of these really interesting diseases. Just again, when I think about, there's so many arguments around like paying attention to what we throw into the environment and not knowing all the full ramifications of like, let's just dump this crap into the river and it's going to help businesses like make more money or something. When you go back into the just kind of literature going way back, even if you go back thousands of years, you can read like Greek stuff about, old people get senile. It's like, that's something people have known about a lot of different diseases, even if they didn't have different names, just through descriptions. And you can go back again thousands of years, and a lot of, you can see things that existed back then and that still exist now. Something like Parkinson's disease, which has really specific symptoms. Again, there's these kind of tremors and motion things that are very distinctive. At least as much as I have heard, that if you go back in all the literature, all the kind of neurological records of people describing patients and stuff, this doesn't really start showing up anywhere until after the advent of the industrial age. So it's clear, part of it is going to be genetic, but it really does seem that part of this existing in our world is some way that stuff we've put into the environment interacts with our nervous system and messes with it. So Parkinson's disease. Again, when you're reading about Parkinson's, they'll talk about the substantia nigra, which is where the neurons are degenerating. They'll talk about the basal nuclei or basal ganglia. Right, remember I said they often say basal ganglia because that's just historically the word they used. Or they'll talk about the corpus striatum, because I remember I said that's another name up here. Corpus striatum, because it's kind of gray, white. So anyway, that's midbrain. I think I'm going to leave the midbrain there and move on to the pons and the medulla. Pons and the medulla do a lot of the real kind of low level control of your autonomic. I talked about the hypothalamus kind of doing a lot of autonomic control, but a lot of the real kind of lowest level circuitry is in here. Like down in here, let me put it on a new page. In fact, I'm even going to just lump them together because they often do similar things or have different circuits that contribute, like the respiratory control, respiratory centers. Down here is where you have the little neural networks that keep sending messages out your phrenic nerve so you keep breathing. And like I said, hypothalamus can control things, but this is at the core where you have the little circuits that just keep sending messages out to keep you breathing. Blood pressure, a lot of the core like reflexes that are keeping your blood pressure is down in here. Medulla is also where you're going to have things like, coughing, sneezing, vomiting. Emesis is if you want to be fancier in terms of But again, things that are really, like I've mentioned, like it doesn't matter if you're a human or a cat or a gecko. You know, if you've got something caught in your airway, you got to clear it out so you don't die. Um, that's kind of why I think they call this kind of a lizard brain or something, because it's like deeper stuff. You know, vomiting, there's something poisoning you, you got to get it out of your body. It doesn't matter what you are. That's like a useful reflex to have. And again, keeping yourself breathing and keeping your blood flowing is critical beyond anything else of like, you know, what do I want to major in or something? Or how am I gonna like stay sane through COVID? Um, so pons and medulla doing a lot of this real kind of core keeping your body going. Um, yeah, just little things I should mention. This vomiting thing is a really, we talked about conditioned learning a little bit in lab, although we didn't actually do the lab. This is this is one of these things that gets connected to other stimuli very strongly. Like if you eat something and you get really sick and you vomit, there is a good chance you're going to never want to go near that again. That's a conditioned learning, like your nervous system's making this connection. This eating this thing made me sick and poisoned me, and I'm just going to avoid it. You know, it can be and it can be bad. Like you could like eat something and it might have actually not been that thing that made you sick. It might have been some other reason you got sick, but you still are going to connect in your brain like, I still don't want to go near that again. Um, so talk about conditioned learning. This one is really creates very strong conditioned learning about, or conditioned reflexes, I can say. Um, so, and the other thing actually that is fascinating, people have, we'll talk about emotions in a little bit with the limbic system, but they have actually found like there's some overlay of like emotions of like disgust that get that actually use some of the circuits that are put into these more kind of basic poisoning circuits. Like part of disgust is there's something kind of toxic just kind of emotionally that it, you know, it's like I'm watching little kids getting molested and there's something that is just toxic in my body or in my psyche, but it's actually being processed or overlain on top of some of these circuits that are about kind of like a physical poisoning. So it's kind of fascinating. Um, so pons in the medulla. Um, other thing I'll mention while we're there is, you know, your brain is in your skull. So here's your skull. There's a hole at the bottom of your skull, the foramen magnum, which I'm sure you remember from anatomy. And you got your brain in here and your brain stem, and then the spinal cord coming out the hole. So if you have swelling in there, let's say you've got like a hematoma, you've got blood, you've got bleeding in there, and it starts pushing down on your brain. The first one of there's a lot of reasons this isn't good, but one of the really bad things that happens is your brainstem, the medulla oblongata, starts getting shoved down out this little hole and starts getting compressed, and the parts that are getting messed up are the real core things that keep you alive, keep your blood pressure stable, you know, and keep you breathing and all that. So so it's important like not to get your brain shoved out the base of your skull that way, because it's going to stop critical functioning that keep you alive. So if you don't, and again, it's a big issue. Like if you have bleeding in your brain or something, that's putting pressure in there. Well, so, again, I don't have that much time. Just so you've heard of these words, coop, contra coop. It's another term that comes up when people are talking about brain damage. So let's get rid of this. Is no longer bleeding in the brain. Let's put the brain back. When you get whacked in the skull, so whack, that's like the coop. Coop is like whacked in the head. Often that is not what causes the main damage to the brain tissue. What happens is because again, the brain is kind of floating in the CSF, so it's kind of floating in there. So the brain gets hit and it kind of goes off, but then it rebounds and comes back. That's what the contra coop is. And it's often that rebound where the real damage happens. You kind of get hit and the brain goes whomp, but then and splats on the inside of the skull again. And that's often where there's actual real lesioning or damaging of the tissue. You can also, shear, like if you have torquing kind of things where your head twists, you can just shear, rip major axon tracts, which can be like, really horrible because then parts of the brain are just disconnected from each other. So you can have brain injuries where you're just damaging cortex through this impact, but then you can also get damaged if there's some twisting and you have axon tracts that get ripped. So in general, watch out. I mean, your brain is pretty good about, I feel okay, like whack, 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 whack. That's not going to hurt me. But really, really major head impacts can really mess you up. So I would say avoid that. All right, continuing. There's one last piece, like physical piece of the brain that we're going to talk about, and then we'll start getting a little more about some systems, and then even more kind of into, EEGs and stuff. But we have to talk about the cerebellum. So again, we had the brain, midbrain, pons, and the medulla. Again, context. The cerebellum, kind of hanging off the back of the pons here. Cerebellum is got really cool, complicated structures and stuff we could talk about. What we're not going to. It's got a cortex, gray matter on the outside. It's got some pockets of gray matter inside. It's got all sorts of cool branching white matter, the arbor vitae and all that. It's got lots of cool circuitry that people have actually spent a lot of time kind of figuring out. For us, the cerebellum is going to be about kind of, smooth kind of motor movements. The cerebellum gets connections to your motor areas, all of the motor planning and motor cortex. So it knows what you want to do. It gets connections from all of the senses from your body about what is your body actually doing. So, it kind of closes the loop. Like when people have damage to their cerebellum, they don't get paralyzed like you would have, like if you had damage to your motor cortex, you'd actually be paralyzed. That's just, I can't move part of my body. When there's damage to the cerebellum, it's more you have trouble just putting your body exactly where you want it to be. Like you'll reach for, like if I'm trying to, again, I want to grab this tape dispenser and I'll grab it, or I can, like, it's probably better if I like, boop, boop. Oh, come on. I'm gonna grab, but then it's like I go too far and I overshoot. It's like, oh shoot, I overshot it. But I realize now, so I'm gonna pull back to correct, but now I'm overshooting the pulling back, and I just keep oscillating around where I want my hand to be rather than just having that tight loop of, I know what I want to do, I know what my muscles are doing, and I'm just going there. Boom. Like you just take for granted that you want to grab this tape dispenser and you reach out and you grab it. But it's really complicated. You've got to have the plan of what you want to do. You have the fine control of all the muscles that are moving your body. You've got all the feedback of what exactly is my body doing. You think about things like, I could take this and I could move it up and down like this, and that's easy. I could take this mouse, move it up and down like this. I can take a little piece of paper, move it up and down like this. In my brain, it all just seems, I want to take this thing and I want to move it up and down like that. But the actual motor programming, to actually do it with this heavy, this is filled with sand if you can't tell, it's just to make it heavy on your desk. The amount, if I was using the same amount of strength that I'm using for my little Choco Cat, like tape dispenser here with a piece of paper, it would just totally be way too much. So there's all of these loops going on about what is my intention for my body, what is my body doing, what's the stress and force putting back on things. So, you don't think about it all, but your cerebellum is doing a lot of processing along with the sensory stuff, the motor stuff, to make sure that your body is kind of well behaved in general.
So, question: the sensory, you mean all the muscle spindles and Golgi tendons?
So exactly, the proprioception, like what in the angle joint receptors and the tension receptors in your tendons and things like that. We'll talk about that in more detail. So it's getting information about what do you want your body to do, what is the core control of the actual low-level muscles, and then what is all the feedback coming in about the actual response and current condition of your body. Some people also think it has more going on, but minimally it's doing that. Yeah.
Professor, so that would be, sorry to interrupt you, that would be like a kind of coordination
Yeah.
or no?
Yes, definitely coordination. Kind
Okay.
of, in fact, yeah, a lot of times they'll say smooth, coordinated movement.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so that's a good word to throw in there, smooth, coordinated movement. Oh, before we leave like muscle and motor stuff, another term that you will probably come up, people often talk about extrapyramidal motor. So this is different. Let me go on a different page. So remember I was talking about in the cerebral cortex, you have your, kind of motor cortex and premotor areas. The neurons in your motor cortex are these neurons that they call pyramidal cells. They look kind of, I think it's because they actually do look kind of triangular. And then the axons come down and are going down the back of your brainstem and going out. You know, the pyramidal tracts, if you remember from anatomy, the pyramidal tracts are these axons from the motor cortex that are going down to operate your skeletal muscle. Remember the decussation of the pyramids. That's where all of these like motor axons are crossing to the opposite side of the body. So the left side of the brain is controlling the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain is controlling the left side of the body. The decussation of the pyramids is just meaning the axons from these motor neurons are crossing over to the opposite side of the body. And then we talked about there is other motor control in the cerebrum, which were the basal nuclei. And those were more modulating motor activity. So sometimes, like particularly with drugs that are given for like psychosis and mental illness, the antipsychotics, people will often talk, you'll see sometimes it'll say extrapyramidal symptoms. When people, if you read this word extrapyramidal symptoms, that means that it's affecting motor control, but not kind of just the direct motor control. It's affecting this kind of modulation of the motor control. So people start getting like classic extrapyramidal symptoms are like they call pill rolling, like you just can't stop moving your hands. It looks like you keep rolling something in your hands, but it's just this, you can't make your hands stop, or you keep sticking your tongue out and in and out and in, and you just can't stop, you know, tongue protrusions and things like that. So those can be symptoms from some of these drugs that are affecting these areas of the brain that modulate motor movement. Sometimes another word for these kind of symptoms they call tardive dyskinesia. Tardive meaning late onset, like if you take the drug, it doesn't start right away, but after you've been taking it for a while, you start getting dyskinesias, like problems with your movement. So tardive dyskinesia, extrapyramidal symptoms, they're dealing with like these basal nuclei, this kind of modulation of your motor that kind of starts dysregulating your movement. What else? So, yeah, and these can, some of these, again, there's things like movements. It can also be full blown, like these things where your whole body just locks up and stuff like that. It can get
So the decussation, that area is like right below the oblongata, or is it somewhere?
Say it again.
Is that decussation area, the point of decussation, is that, does that lie somewhere in the
It's on the back of the medulla oblongata. Yeah, it's right along the back. The pyramids, those axons are running along the back of the medulla, and the decussation of the pyramids is just as they're going down, a lot of them are just swapping sides. About 80% of the motor ones cross over there in that decussation area. All right, continuing.
I have a quick question. So with the pyramidal tracts, since they kind of control like the lower parts of the body, like on the opposite side, is that like why with like those kind of pupillary reflexes and everything above that area, you saw like ipsilateral movements and stuff, or
Right.
ipsilateral responses?
There's no things still cross over up on top too.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to, yeah, I'm pretty sure they do. I should double check. I should double check, but I'm pretty sure that that still is the case for the cranial nerves that are controlling stuff up in your head. But I
Oh,
should double check.
okay.
Um, all right, let us continue now. All right, so we have talked about different sections of the brain. Now I'm going to talk about two concepts that incorporate many different parts of the brain. One they call the reticular activating system. So this is not a particular area. It's an aggregation of different areas and neurons distributed along in the brainstem that work together. So like if here's the brain, the reticular activating system is an aggregation of different areas that send messages up into the higher brain areas. And these are necessary for what we call arousal, for being awake. So not arousal like getting like excited or something, more just like not being unconscious. If you have damage to this, you can end up like being in a coma. If you don't have this activity to like kind of wake up the cortex. Now, what is the difference between being in a coma and being asleep?
You're arousable when you're sleeping.
Yeah, exactly. Like if somebody's asleep and you kick them, they wake up. If someone's in a coma and you kick them, they just lie there, right? This is a non-rousable sleep. You know, that's the big difference. You know, if you just walked up and somebody, you couldn't really tell probably if they're in a coma, if they're asleep. But once you like kind of shake them, try to wake them up, then you get more information. So reticular activating system, I'm not going to say much more about it, but you should be aware of that there are these collections of areas in the brainstem that then send messages up into the higher brain areas that are necessary to kind of wake things up and keep them awake. The other system we talk about is the limbic system. So these are a variety of different areas and they're all kind of interconnected and they all collectively deal with emotions. A lot of them we've already talked about. You know, what are some of the areas in the brain that deal with emotions?
Amygdala.
Hypothalamus.
So the amygdala, which we talked about mainly being around fear and anxiety. And again, I think I'm going to not talk about it as much, but there's a lot of research on the amygdala since it's one of the few places we actually can try to, at a neurological level, kind of assess how different stimuli are processed into anxiety, more or less anxiety. You know, kind of the upshot is, you know, there's kind of this natural thing in our brains that, you know, if you tend to categorize things as in group and out group, or, you know, in my tribe or out of my tribe, you know, there tends to be this more natural activation of this kind of anxiety of like, I got to be careful here. I'm not. Whereas if you categorize things more of just like individuals or as people, then you don't get quite the same thing. Like they've done these studies where if you show them a bunch of pictures and you have to like decide, you know, their race or their socioeconomic status or this or that, you're categorizing them into these groups that you're either in or not in, then there's this kind of natural thing in your brain that just makes you a little more uncomfortable if they're outside of your group. Whereas if you look at the same pictures and you're asked questions about, you know, this person, like what kind of hobbies do they want, or this or that. If you look at them and the question is not about like putting them into a box, then you are less likely to actually get this, you know, kind of intrinsic activation of like, I'm a little weirded out here or something. So amygdala, someone said hypothalamus, we've talking about a bunch.
And also the hippocampus associated with the long-term memories.
Yeah, the hippocampus. So we're going to talk about the hippocampus in just a few moments. Hippocampus, and obviously it's clear it's going to be an important part of memory. It's also part of emotions. Emotions really make a difference with your memories, right? You know, it's, if you think, yeah, I mean, if the example I usually use doesn't work so much because we're all online, because now you probably, but like, again, normally you're gonna barely remember today. You won't remember today. You'll know today must have existed, and you knew you took physiology because you're a nurse now, but I don't remember what's going on this day. Whereas if, you know, all of a sudden, like, you know, I don't know, my house exploded and all of a sudden you just saw blood splatter everywhere, you would like, I'd be burned into your brain, and you would like probably never forget this Zoom session, you know, but for the most part, it's probably just going to evaporate. So your emotions have a major role in how strongly memories get set. Hippocampus, we talked about the anterior cingulate gyrus. Which is that place kind of in the more the midline of the cortex. Parts of the thalamus, actually. Another part that's interesting is the insula. The insula was that area kind of in that crack behind the temporal lobe. And the insula plays a role in just kind of your sense of your body. And there's some interesting, you know, there's different ways. Emotions are obviously super complicated, but there's part of emotions have to do with just kind of physical experiences. You know, at least some aspects of emotions seem to be kind of happening like as an afterthought of like my heart speeding up and I'm feeling, everything feels weird. I must be scared. You know, it's not like, oh, I'm scared and now all this stuff's happening. Like the emotion is kind of this secondary experience after something your body is actually responding on a more visceral level. Obviously, there's deeper things. Emotions get much more kind of esoteric or more complicated, but some aspects of them really seem to actually be things layered on top of more visceral autonomic responses that then you experience at, you know, on the subjective level as fear or like, or whatever.
Question. The insula, is it somehow connected to the gustatory system, the taste?
The taste is down in there as well, but that's not so much the part that I'm bringing up right now. So the insula has different things in there. The part that seems more relevant for its role in emotions is kind of the sense of what your body is doing. So limbic system, you know, and then these are all interconnected with axon tracts. There's, you know, between the hypothalamus and the hippocampus is like the fornix and everything. So there's lots of interconnections, but they're different areas. And I should also mention while we're here is, while we do know these are all important, like the details are still really tricky. I mean, one of the things that was actually really, when I started doing my research, I kind of assumed we knew more about what is the actual representation of emotions in the brain. Then I started just looking, trying to find like, okay, let's look deeper into this. I always just kind of would lecture like, oh yeah, these areas are involved in emotion, and we know amygdala is more about fear and anxiety, and then kind of, but I think this is where I thought like, okay, if I'm just not privy to the deeper information, but we really don't know what it means to be happy or sad or jealous or scared, or I guess a little bit around scared, or powerless, or there's so many different emotions, and a lot of the emotions are complicated. Schadenfreude, it's like, I feel bad about that, but kind of deserved it. I'm kind of happy. It's like a lot of times emotions are, or like, this is terrifying, but it's thrilling. This is great. This is fun, but I'm like terrified. It's like real emotions are really complicated. So this idea of, so I would say I can describe motor stuff pretty well. A lot of those circuits are laid out. We can describe the actual like electrical signaling from one area to the other place and the representations, things pretty well. But then there's other parts of kind of core human experience that we really don't have detailed knowledge. All right, limbic system. All right, so now I'm going to move on. So we're gonna walk away from the brain as a kind of physical thing where we're looking at what's happening in this area or that area. And now we're gonna look at, we'll start with EEG. All right, so here's somebody, and somewhere inside their head is a brain. And it's zipping and zipping and zapping, and all the little electrical signals going everywhere. But obviously, unless there's some real compelling reason, you are not going to drill a hole and get access to their brain. But you might want to have some readout on what is the neural activity going on. And so what people do is they put little electrodes on their head. And you can read tiny little voltage changes, again, down on the level of microvolts, like millionths of volts, that are pulsating up and down on the scalp, that are created by the neural activity of the underlying brain tissue. So this is what we're going to call our EEG. Which is the electroencephalogram. Again, we're going to see similar concepts when we get to the cardiovascular system. We're going to put electrodes on your body and see electrical signals that are coming from your heart. That's going to be an electrocardiogram, right? We'll also talk about signals you can read on your skin that are generated by the muscles depolarizing during muscle contraction. That would be like an electromyogram. But for right now, we're going to stay focused on electroencephalogram, which again, encephalogram meaning the electrical signals that we're picturing that are being generated by the cortex of your brain here. Um, and these are clinically really useful because there are typical patterns that you can see that are like normal, and typical patterns that you can see during different kinds of activities, particularly different stages of sleep. Like these are really important for doing sleep studies, trying to see if there's something wrong in just how your brain is working while you're trying to fall asleep. So let's talk about the different classical like EEGs that people measure for the scalp here. Okay, so alpha wave. So if you don't know, this is an alpha. This is a Greek letter alpha. Alpha waves tend to be around around 10 hertz. What do I have here? 8 to 13 hertz. And it's not a clear, it's not like really pretty. It's kind of like, again, remember the brain is really not super clean. It's doing all sorts of stuff. But what the people who are skilled at interpreting these things, they'll kind of draw lines through the main peaks and say, aha, it looks like it's kind of going up and down about 10 times a second, that is going to be an alpha wave. And this is when someone is awake but relaxed. If you all of a sudden you tell them, I would like you to count backwards by sevens from 100. And now they're like, oh, fuck. All right, 100, 93, oh man, 80. It's like, as soon as they're concentrating and trying to figure something out, the waves change pretty dramatically, and you get what are called beta waves. This is a beta. These are much faster and smaller. I have here 14 to 25 hertz. Or if you snap or you clap. I had a student who was an EEG tech and did one of her independent research things using the EEG stuff in the lab, and it was really just fun to watch. Someone would be in alpha rhythm, and then you just snap or clap, and they'd be like, whoa, what is that? I'm paying attention. And all of a sudden, it would just speed up and get smaller and much faster. So it's like going up and down twice as fast as these alpha waves. And this is basically alert and concentrating. And I'm drawing it kind of sloppy because the real ones they're not pretty, but you really do see this difference. It's very clear that when someone's relaxed, it's kind of slower and going up and down somewhere around 10 times a second. And if you get their attention, you see it speed up and kind of tighten up like this. So both of these are common in people who are awake, whether they're more relaxed or more kind of focused. The next two I'm going to do are slower, and they're only going to be seen in a normal adult who is asleep. This is theta. So theta waves, I have here like 3.5 to 7.5 hertz. So these are much slower. These are common in children. Like if you're a kid and you see these, you don't worry, they're normal. This is while the brain is still wiring up. You get these, but in an adult, these should not show up while they're awake. If you look at like there are these little books that show typical EEGs, for people at different ages. And you can see there's, the patterns change. What is normal for a kid is not normal for an adult. Your brain does a lot of rewiring as you grow. We're going to meet theta waves in a few moments when we get into sleep. The deepest part of sleep is going to be the slowest, largest type of brain waves. Are called the delta waves. What do I have here? 3 to 4 hertz. Or less. These are basically deep sleep. Or coma. So this is going to be the deepest part of sleep. Or if you have damage to your reticular activating system, or if you're in anesthesia. So EEGs, there's lots more. People use them for lots of different things. But this is kind of the basic parts, the basic kind of just introduction to what they are. And again, they're going to be helpful for us when we talk about sleep right now. We're going to talk about sleep. And to really understand the different phases of sleep, you have to think about EEGs, because what your brain is doing during like REM versus non-REM sleep is very different. And it doesn't make sense unless we're kind of talking about beta waves and delta waves and things like that. And I should mention, these delta waves are still there even like if you're in a coma. If you don't have any EEG, that's one of the clinical ways that they'll say you're dead. So you should have some basic neural activity in your brain if you're not dead. All right, what else? I can just really briefly, I'm talking about the changes in normal EEG from child to adult. You've probably heard this before, but in case you haven't, I should just mention the idea of the wiring of the brain as you get older. Like when you're born, you have like twice as many neurons in your brain as you're going to have as an adult, and they're not fully wired up. The circuitry is not, think about a baby just goes, blah, blah, blah. And then like at some point they're toddling, and at some point they're like on the high bars doing giant swings, and like, the circuitry wires up and gets things start working better and better and better, right? Obviously your brain is constantly working in terms of figuring out how to operate your body, discern stimuli. That's all these neural circuits that are kind of wiring up and are getting kind of into their mature forms. As that happens, you end up getting more myelin in the area where the circuits are more mature, because you have more of the axons that are interconnecting things. So people have done these studies using MRI. They can look at the proportion of like myelin to white matter to gray matter. And what they find is like when you're a baby, like there's just, more gray matter around. And as you get older, more and more of your brain gets higher proportions of myelin as the circuitry is wiring up. And what from these studies, the implications is that these prefrontal areas don't finish their full wiring until you're already in your late teens, early 20s. Which has fascinating implications. It's saying that, the part of your brain around impulse control and decision making is not fully at its mature wiring until you're out of high school. So if you have some kid doing stupid things or being impulsive in a way, it might not just be willpower, it's just their brain hasn't completely wired up there yet. So it's not shocking that high school kids are more likely to do something really stupid than someone who's in their 30s or something. So yeah, it's just I thought that was fascinating when people first started realizing that about the wiring there. All right, let's continue. Sleep. So sleep is, it's fascinating. People are learning more and more about sleep and what sleep does. There's still lots of mysteries in it. There's mysteries around the control of sleep. There's mysteries of why we need to sleep. Definitely some stuff that happens in sleep is helping kind of consolidate memories. They have definitely found if two people are trying to learn something and one gets adequate of the right kind of sleep and the other person doesn't, then they don't remember it as much if they don't get to sleep. There are hard scientific reasons to sleep when you're trying to be a student. It's not just you don't want to just feel ragged all the time. Things aren't gonna you're not gonna remember stuff as well if you're not getting adequate sleep. During sleep, it now seems like we're going to talk about, actually, we're not going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the lymphatic system later. The brain doesn't really have the same kind of lymphatic system that the rest of the body does, but people have started been talking about the glymphatic, where during sleep, there seems to be more of kind of just flows of extracellular fluid kind of helping kind of cleanse areas around the neurons and stuff like that, which has been kind of fascinating. So something about sleep seems to be playing a role in that. Sleep seems to be, kind of helping set the memories that you want to keep and letting go of memories that you don't want to keep. You've got so much information coming in, most of it you're not going to remember, and some of it you got to remember. Sleep has two main components that you go through when you're asleep at night. And even though from the outside it just looks like you're lying there and asleep, they're pretty radically different in terms of what's going on in your brain. So there is what we call non-REM, should maybe capitalize it, non-REM sleep, also called slow wave, versus REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement. And these are things that you alternate through the night. You'll spend some time in this slow wave non-REM sleep, and then like an hour later, you're in REM for a while. And then after you've been in REM for a while, you're going to go back into this. And after you've been in that, you'll back into this. You might go back and forth like 3 times or something or more during the course of the night. So you're kind of going back and forth between these two. You know, the amount of time you spend in one or the other varies through the night. Actually varies based on what kind of sleep you've gotten up to that point. The exact nature of the slow wave sleep, how deep you go, how slow the waves actually get, also depends on the phase, the time of the night, as well as other aspects, even your age. But so I'm going to start with kind of talking about them in the broad picture, and then I'll get kind of more detail about them. Okay, in slow wave sleep, the EEG is slow. EEG waves, you know, go down, you know, they're going to start like, you know, this alpha, and then we'll talk about sleep spindles, but they're going to be slow, you know, like theta and delta. During REM sleep, even though you are asleep, your EEG looks like it's awake. You can have like beta waves, you know, stuff that would be if you're really like concentrating and trying to deal with things, but you're asleep. Because your brain is really active, you don't want it to actually make your body do the stuff that your brain is doing. Are paralyzed. You know, except eye and ear. You know, this is why it's called rapid eye movement. People are having all this brain activity. Most of their body is paralyzed, but their eyes are wiggling all over the place because the eye muscles aren't being paralyzed. We'll talk about in the ear, you've got the little tensor tympanum and stapedius. So you also have little ear muscles can wiggle. People who've done sleep research have actually found that like the eyes really do seem to be tracking, like if you're in, this is where most dreams occur. And if somebody is in their dream and they're moving their eyes back and forth, the eyes in their actual body lying in their bed are going to be moving back and forth in the same way. There are these sleep disorders where this sleep paralysis is not working, and then it can be really messed up. I went to a talk with one doctor who had one patient who literally would like beat his wife up in bed because he would have he'd have dreams where literally he'd have dream that his wife is being attacked and he's actually beating off the assailant. And in reality, he was actually beating the crap out of his wife who was lying next to him in bed. Other people have just got out of bed and walked out of windows and stuff because they're just like, they're doing something. They're in their dream, they're having some adventure, but their body is actually doing it in real life, even though. So if this paralysis is not working, it can be really bad.
Professor, one question. So sleepwalking enters in that category? No.
It's going to be different. I'll get there.
Okay.
So sleepwalking is not so much this acting out your dreams. So that sleepwalking is more of this unconscious thing that we'll talk about. Other things, the things that can happen, if people have probably experienced, sometimes if you wake up or at least you're kind of awake, but this hasn't totally stopped, it can be weird, like you're stuck. Sometimes people feel like something's on their chest because you can't operate, you can't gasp or anything because that control isn't back yet. So people feel like they can't move, they feel like they're pinned. It can be really terrifying for people if they kind of wake up incompletely and this hasn't resolved yet. Heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, temperature goes up. So your body is pretty active. You've got like increased heart rate, temperature, your brain looks like beta waves. So REM, your eyes are wiggling around. As opposed to the non-REM sleep, the slow wave sleep, your brain waves are really slow. You move, move like, every 15 minutes or so to reposition. You have to do some repositioning or else you're going to end up with bed stores. You need to kind of keep your body moving a little bit so you don't block circulation. Right? You've probably, if someone's just lying and never moving around, you start actually having problems with not enough blood flow to the region. And so you will move a little bit, but it's not like you don't need to paralyze. Your muscles are not paralyzed because there's no activity to run your muscles, right? You don't have to turn off your muscles because your brain is basically slow. And again, your heart rate, your temperature are lower here. This seems to be more where you get like sleepwalking and stuff. And actually like night terrors. Sleepwalking is a weird thing. Sleepwalking seems to be where people just kind of go on autopilot. They'll just kind of get up and start walking, but it's this kind of real unconscious thing. There's even like sleep eating. Like I've read about patients where like people are on these diets and they never lose any weight, and they ultimately like put these little cameras on and realize that in the middle of the night they're just unconsciously walking out of bed, going to the refrigerator or getting to the cupboard, getting food, and just got little grabbing it in their mouth and ended up back in bed. So sleepwalking is different than like kind of what I was talking about, like acting out a dream. It's just kind of more, kind of zombie kind of thing going on. So let's talk a little bit more about sleep. Where are we? Yeah. So before you fall asleep, you're probably relaxed. So like we've got like alpha waves. The way you know that you're starting to fall asleep for real and not just relaxed is there are these big bursts of activity, which they call sleep spindles. Again, like in this research project that this student did, she was able to tell if her subjects were actually falling asleep rather than just being relaxed and doing the task. Because if you see these sleep spindles coming, you know that this person is not just lying there relaxed and awake, that they're actually shifting, their brain is shifting gears into a very different mode. And then it goes more into the slower wave. Basically the theta and the delta. The delta is like the deepest. This tends to be kind of the most restorative sleep where you wake up really feeling like you've rested. Supposedly, as you get older, your sleep tends to not spend much time in that really deep sleep anymore, which is part of the reason why as people get older, they tend to not sleep, or why they take more naps, because their sleep at night isn't restoring them in the way that it would have when they were younger, when they spent more time in this kind of deep delta slow wave sleep. And then what happens is, like, if you look at kind of during the night, people talk about, kind of, kind of, it might go down, it might go back up, it might go down, and then all of a sudden you're in REM. And then out of REM, and now you kind of go back down and up, and then you're back into REM. So like when you see in fact, it's probably worth.
Is there any specific reason why we go REM, why we get so active when we're sleeping, those phases in sleep? Why that happen? It's not a specific reason why our brain does that.
REM and slow wave sleep seem to be doing different things. Like if you're not getting enough REM, you'll have what's called REM rebound, where you're going to have way more REM than normal. In fact, in the amount of REM changes as you get older, like babies have way more REM than adults. My friend that I work with, he was saying when he had his son was first born, he said like his kid would fall asleep and instantly his eyes would start zipping all over the place. Whereas, as an adult, you fall asleep, it's going to be a while before REM really kicks in. And again, I'm not as familiar with all of the literature, but definitely people have found there's different things. If you suppress slow wave sleep versus suppress REM sleep, different things will happen. So there's different things they play different roles, but I'm not going to be the person who can tell you as much. Before we stop, I want to show you one last thing here. Here it is. All right, I'm gonna slideshow. I'm going to share. So this is just from your book. This is kind of showing what the like one of these like sleep charts would look like. I want a slideshow. I want to just see the slide. Resume slideshow. There we go. And so awake. So here you can see this, and this is kind of just the slower and slower, and then it has to come back up, and then this orange part, or red part, this green part, this is the REM. So it's in this picture, it looks like it's kind of just continuous, but it's a fundamentally different thing going on. So now this person's in REM, and then they come out of REM, their brain waves slow down again, then they kind of come back up, and now all of a sudden we're in REM, and now their brain's going crazy and their heart's speeding up, and then it all slows down again, and then they're back in REM, and now we're here, and then we're out, and now they're back in slow wave, but here they're not going into the really slow waves. As you get further into the night, you have less of the really deep, slow, like delta waves, and stay more into the not as slow waves. So this is kind of a typical night sleep. You kind of go back and forth between slow wave and REM, The slow wave isn't always exactly the same. Sometimes it goes down deeper into slow, and sometimes it's not as slow. And you keep, and the length of time you spend in the REM varies. It might only be a little bit of time, or it might be like almost an entire hour in REM. So the amount of REM changes as you go through the night. And again, it depends also on how much you've been sleeping ahead of time. If you haven't been getting enough REM, you'll get into these REM rebounds. What else would I say? Oh, sleeping meds. One of the things to be aware of with sleeping meds is both of these two parts of sleep are very different and play different roles and are important. And some sleeping meds work just by kind of turning everything down and kind of suppressing everything. And maybe you'll get a lot of slow wave sleep, but you're not getting the REM sleep, which is not going to be good over the long term. So, you know, there are different meds. I think Ambien is one of the ones that actually gives you more typical like patterns of slow and fast, or slow and REM. But that is something to, like, the idea of a drug that knocks you out, you know, it might be good in the short term to knock you out, but it might not be a good thing overall because you're not getting actually the balances of the different phases of sleep that you would normally get. So that's something people look at in sleep meds.